Coming up next, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Pro Wrestling Report Prime Time, Saturday night right here on My 24 Milwaukee. We've got complete coverage and continuing coverage of the situation that occurred this past Monday night on WWE Raw with Jerry the King Lawler, who suffered a heart attack live on television. So, without further ado, the Pro Wrestling Report Prime Time Saturday night starts right now. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime Saturday night. Damian Nelson sitting here alongside Dave Hero, and our guest this week, Mike Wickett of Sports Radio 1250 WSSP. Michael, how are you?
Wonderful, Damian.
Good.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, it's a special show. We've got a lot of analysis to do. I wanted to get a sports radio perspective on some of the questions we're going to be asking about the situation with Jerry Lawler this past Monday night. David Hero with us as well. And let's get right down to it. For those of you who don't know or have not heard, this past Monday night on WWE Raw, about 2 hours into the program, Jerry the King Lawler suffered a heart attack live on air while broadcasting a tag team matchup between Kane and Daniel Bryan and the Primetime Players. He went down at the table at ringside, had to be carried to the back after some CPR was conducted on him at ringside. And once in the back, more intense CPR treatment from the EMTs who were on site, which did not immediately prove successful backstage, which led to a lot of panic. And with him not being responsive to that treatment immediately, it was clear that at that time, at that point, initially at least, Jerry Lawler was clinically dead for a time in the arena in Montreal this past Monday night. Lawler was then taken to a hospital in Montreal where he thankfully began breathing on his own and became responsive to treatment, and then subsequently had stents placed in his arteries to address the issue of his blockage in some of his arteries, which was the main cause of the heart attack. At this point, Jerry Lawler is stable and recovering. He's now able to speak. He's on the road to what appears to be a full recovery, and thankfully, there's no suspected brain damage at this time, because sometimes when you go that long without oxygen, you can suffer from some brain damage, and luckily that's not the case for Jerry Lawler. Now, gentlemen, what we need to talk about is all the things that led up to this. There's been speculation, there's been discussion, there's been talk about why this may have occurred and why this may have happened to Mr. Lawler this past Monday night. And it should be no secret that Jerry did also wrestle this past Monday night in a matchup. A tag team matchup where he teamed in a tag team against, teamed with Randy Orton against CM Punk and I believe Dolph Ziggler, all men of a certain age who were younger than him, of course, and able to go a lot quicker. But, you know, one thing I noticed in that matchup, Jerry did a tremendous job. And I even noticed that I remember talking to you and saying, wow, Jerry's on tonight.
He was a house of fire. He was rolling, he was punching, he was kicking, he was fist dropping, elbow dropping, pulling the strap down. Jerry the King Lawler was rolling. You never would have thought in a million years what would have happened almost an hour later with the King. And amazing story. I mean, the King was dead for 15 minutes. He was not breathing. There was no oxygen getting to his brain. He was zapped with the paddles, not once, not twice, not three, 7 times. Now, I don't know about you, but from what I've heard, they usually call it a day after 3 or 4, but to do 7 paddles is just an amazing story. He had obviously angels on his side, and Jerry the King Lawler, huge for him. I mean, huge for the family, huge for wrestling, because without Jim Ross at ringside, without Jerry the King Lawler at ringside, we're stuck with your guy, Michael Cole, who did a fantastic job. Did a fantastic job, but just Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Just
it's a vibe there.
There's a weird vibe there.
Your initial reaction, Mike Wickett, to hearing this news about Jerry the King Lawler and knowing that this happened on live television. I mean, the man literally had a heart attack and keeled over, for lack of better words, on the live broadcast Monday night.
I think it's an incredible story, and he's one of the last, one of the last connections to the old school wrestling world. Because we see guys and they make their appearances, and we saw what happened with the 1000th episode of Raw. Some of them came back, but Jerry's there night in, night out with WWE and on Monday Night Raw, and he has that old school flavor and keeps that old school connection. And we always see he's talking about the old days and having respect for what came before him. And you don't want to lose that connection. And more so, we didn't want to lose Jerry Lawler. And when that happened, being somebody who was watching it and then flipping over to Twitter and watching, the Pro Wrestling Report with up-to-the-minute updates and everything that was coming from Michael Cole and family and friends, it was as if a national story had just exploded in front of our eyes on Monday Night Raw.
And it actually had, because you saw the national media outlets pick up on it. And it's weird in pro wrestling when something real happens, because you sort of wonder if that line is being crossed. It was clear that something was wrong, and this was not part of the scripted events of the night. We were talking, David, about during that tag matchup. I remember I was getting ready to step out into the balcony, and there was dead silence. It was nothing. And I'm like, well, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. Kept going, rewound on the DVR and watched and heard the I don't know how you describe the sound, but I guess for lack of a better term, snoring or gurgling, yeah. And realized out of the couple of shots that we saw that clearly there was an incident occurring at the broadcast table, unclear what at the time, but clearly something going on. And just the initial reaction to that was, this is not good.
Well, as I was watching it with senior intern Cal, and he's like, what is that noise? And I'm looking on the Twitter feeds and trying to pay attention, and all of a sudden you see the King fall forward in the lower right-hand corner of the TV. You knew something was off. I thought maybe he was sick, the flu or whatnot, but who would have known, who would have thought going forward what the next hour and 10 minutes would have meant for the world of wrestling?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pro Wrestling Report. Primetime Saturday night. Davey and Nelson here, sitting alongside David Hero and Mike Wickett from WSSP Sports Radio 1250. When can you be heard on there?
Monday through Friday, morning 6 to 10.
Every Monday through Friday?
Every Monday through Friday.
6 a.m.?
There is a 6 a.m. I know that you two, after your nights of Jameson, see 6 a.m. on the other side, but some of us get up for the day, and it begins before 6 a.m.
How about your weekends?
6 a.m.
We are discussing the situation that developed on this past Monday's WWE Raw with Jerry the King Lawler, who suffered a heart attack at ringside while doing commentary. And gentlemen, a little bit about Jerry Lawler, because some questions have been asked, and I think it's important to put in perspective some of the things that people have been asking about. Firstly, Jerry's 62 years of age. He's been wrestling for well over 40 years. And for those of you that don't know, he is a legend in professional wrestling, specifically in Memphis, Tennessee, where he actually ran for mayor a couple of years ago. It was a failed effort, but that popular in the city that he felt he could be the mayor of that town. He actually has been on WWE Raw since the very first episode in 1993. The only person who could really say, well, there was a little time where he left after the cat, but generally been on since the very first episode.
What's up with cats? We're always chasing them.
He still wrestles regularly. That's a point I think need to be made, because some people have questioned whether or not he should have been in the ring, if not just this past week, but over the weeks before as well. And Jerry's been wrestling for, as I said, over 40 years and still considers himself, by what he's said in interviews, a wrestler first and a commentator second. Jerry probably wrestles on average about twice a week. And
he's very busy on the indie scene. I mean, he's one of the more popular guys out there. Every weekend you can see Jerry the King Lawler at, and without not being sarcastic, a bingo hall or a high school auditorium or somewhere all across the nation. I mean, the guy is busy. He's a draw every Monday night. So, it's easy for the King to stay active. And, he's an old school kind of guy. He's not doing all the flips into more flips and hurricane ranas and moonsaults.
And elbow drops.
And he's punching and kicking his way all across the country.
One thing we talked about earlier, you mentioned David Hero, how many times it took for them to shock him, I guess, back into life backstage. And, one thing that I think a point that needs to be made is he was in Aruba the weekend before working for Kevin Nash.
He flew into Montreal from Aruba. He was down there for Kevin Nash's Aruba Caribbean Slam, was called. And wow.
While many people are saying this was unfortunate, if it were to happen, and quite frankly, it would have happened given the blockage he had in his arteries at some point, it could not have happened at a better time.
Oh, he is around a first-class EMT crew. because, WWE, for as much as we make fun of, poke, and criticize, they are a top-notch company. They have the best of the best, trainers, doctors, everything. If it would have happened on an indie show, let's say in Podunk somewhere, I highly doubt they would have had the paddles at that indie show, and Jerry the King Lawler would have, definitely would have died.
Not only that, but if it would have been in the airplane between Aruba and Montreal,
absolutely.
It would have been in the rental car between the airport and the venue. If it would have been in the hotel just an hour or two later, completely different outcome.
The stars were aligned for Jerry the King Lawler, and he was very, very fortunate.
You bring up the age, though, 62. I'm not one to tell somebody to quit their dream or stop doing what they do. I mean, Jerry is wrestling. He's been wrestling, as you said, Damian, for over 40 years. But at some point, you have to realize that, you look at the stars of today. They're 24, they're 25, they're 30. At 62, you may not belong in that ring anymore. And again, it's tough to tell someone when to stop. You guys know this. You deal with wrestlers on a day in and day out basis, much closer than I do. But at 62, Dave?
It's hard to say no when that phone rings and there is a cash payment waiting for you on the other side.
Ask Roger Clemens, the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We talk about the world-class or the top-notch EMTs and personnel that they have backstage at WWE events and whatnot. How would you compare that to what you see at NFL games, NBA games, even Major League Baseball games, their preparedness and readiness to deal with the situation that happens on the field?
I think it's one and the same. I think when you talk about being at WWE, it's the NFL of professional wrestling. It's the NBA of professional wrestling. I mean, they always will have multiple stretchers, many ambulances. They'll have plenty of EMTs. I mean, there's probably no difference between going down to the Bradley Center to watch a Bucks game and the amount of medical care they have on site than when you go and watch Monday Night Raw like we did a couple of weeks ago.
Well, and of course, even at Blizzard Brawl, the event we're having in December, we always have an EMT on hand, which is needed. And Jerry the King Lawler is a Blizzard Brawl veteran. He was there. He gave your cohort
Sparky went upside
2 pile
down.
drivers twice, a letter in his mailbox and whatnot. And, that reminds me, we got Blizzard Brawl 8 coming up.
Just a few months.
With the son of Jerry the King Lawler, the return of Too Cool, Rikishi, Sky Too Hotty, and Grandmaster Sexay, Saturday, December 1st.
And we're going to take a look at a promo for Blizzard Brawl. When we come back, we're going to have some comments you're going to share with us on a conversation you had with Mr. Lawler, Brian Lawler, just a few hours ago, actually. It's the Pro Wrestling Report, primetime Saturday night. Blizzard Brawl 8, Saturday, December 1st, Waukesha County Expo Center. As you said, David Hero, one of the key talents on that show, Grandmaster Sexy, part of Too Cool, along with Rikishi.
The first time in 13 years.
It's going to be fascinating on that night. But for those of you that don't know, Brian Lawler, Christopher, Grandmaster Sexay, whatever you want to call him, the son of Jerry the King Lawler, and David Hero, you had a conversation with him just before this taping about some of the insight as to what happened that night, Monday night, with Jerry the King Lawler.
Yeah, I was talking with Brian, and he told me, he obviously what we saw was what happened. He said in the back, it was over 15 minutes. They said borderline, between 15 and 20 minutes where the King was not breathing the paddles 7 times. And he woke up Tuesday morning in his hospital room, obviously, and of course was unaware of where he was. He thought he was still in Aruba. I don't think he remembers having that match or whatnot. He couldn't believe what happened. And of course, he's not talking. He's doing everything on a notepad. And, Brian told me, he's like, he goes, everyone's support, all the prayers that came through, whether it be emails, text messages, Twitter, Facebook, whatnot. He said he had never been so overwhelmed by the wrestling fan support as he was. And he said that as terrible of an incident that this was with his dad, he says it's actually brought the two of them closer together than they've ever been before.
Interesting. And I've gone back and I've watched not just what happened during that matchup, but Jerry Lawler over the course of the evening. No clues, no indicators,
no signs,
no offness. No, if
it would have been during a Divas match, I probably could have seen it coming. But
all those curves and me with no brakes.
But who would have thought that Kane and Daniel Bryan, the primetime players?
Let's talk about that for a minute too, because you could see the concern on Charles Robinson's and Kane's face, and you could see you talk about a top-notch profession, and you can file that away under whatever you want, under what we're saying about WWE, but the show had to go on, and it did go on, but it went on in pure modified fashion.
Imagine the distraction at ringside when you look over, if you're Kane, and you see Jerry the King Lawler hunched over, throwing up, getting sick, all over the floor, all over the desk, and the absolute fear in the eyes of Michael Cole.
Right.
Who is there right next, seeing everything, but he needs to keep the ship going in the right direction while trying to get the EMTs over, keep the cameras away, and then all of a sudden you got 17,000 fans focused in one general direction.
And the link that's going on between Michael Cole and Vince McMahon, who's on the other side of those headsets every week. They're probably, Vince is probably asking him what's going on.
And Michael Cole can't answer because he can only hear what's coming in.
Exactly. There is a talk around, but at the same time, that's the last thing I'm sure he was thinking about. But from what we understand, once Jerry got to the back, Vince McMahon was right at his side before returning to his duties at the gorilla position and producing the show, which is what he does each and every week from backstage. But the question that needs to be answered, I guess, is should the show have gone on? We talk about the similarities between this and the incident in 1999 with Owen Hart, where Owen Hart, unfortunately, it was a different outcome in that situation and was an accident as opposed to a natural life event. Should the show have continued? Should Raw had stayed on the air for that last hour after this incident? We'll start with you, Mr. Wickett.
I'd say no. I really do. I mean, when something like that happens, to me, you don't prepare for that kind of situation. But in my mind, I would have been the one to pull the plug. And you might call that me being afraid, maybe overreacting. I mean, it was a different kind of show to watch, and it was an eerie feeling watching that show. I would have pulled the plug because you are talking about one of the main characters in the show collapsing and perhaps dying on live TV.
To a degree, they did pull the plug, as there was no commentary for the last portion of the show.
Was that Michael Cole's? Was that his call, or was that Vince's call, or was that a combination?
I would venture to say it was a combination.
I don't think Michael Cole could have called the rest of the show. I don't think his mind, and to bring anybody else out from the back who just watched the King get paddled 7 times, their heads aren't going to be in the right spot.
They would have been in a worse place had they immediately replaced him with a Matthews or anybody else, because that would have I think that would have been looked upon as more careless. More a show of lack of caring by WWE to bring somebody else out to replace, like it had not happened. They went silent for the balance of the show. Now the question is, if this were to happen in a football game, baseball game, whatever it might be, would the game continue?
There would be a long pause. Let's say it was a referee, someone along the same lines.
No. Let's say it's a head coach. I think because if you're going to compare apples to apples, you got to say it's a head coach or a player.
Or somebody on the sideline.
Well,
plays a pivotal role in the broadcast.
Now, if it's a broadcast, wouldn't they, let's say it was someone, God forbid, it was Joe Buck. Would the game go on silent if it was on Fox? Let's say the next Packers
Sometimes
game.
that's actually better.
But we're talking about a commentator. Let's pretend that it is Joe Buck or that it's Troy Aikman. Unfortunately, what if something like that were to happen? Let's compare apples to apples, broadcasters to broadcasters. Does the Packers 49ers game still go on?
Absolutely.
In silence?
Absolutely.
If Joe Buck loses Troy Aikman, does Joe Buck call the game or does it go on in silence?
Because they can always switch the feed over to the radio. If had to be.
Well, this did happen back in March on a soccer game overseas with Fabrice Muamba, which I know you're familiar
football,
with.
Huge. Not soccer.
It's called football over there, but same thing happened.
Don't irritate our international fans.
He collapsed on the field and was clinically dead for several minutes, was resuscitated on the field after several shots from the defib. That game, well, I think it went on. But this is almost the same exact thing, except, well, you do have a primary player, Jerry Lawler, a primary player as well. What similarities are there to
The only
to
time Vinnie Mac has ever canceled a show was when Chris Benoit killed his family. Mm-hmm. And I think that was done more for political reasons than it was for anything else.
Owen happened during the show. Jerry happened during the show.
Yes.
One other piece is the injury factor. While this is more substantial than an injury, several stars chimed in and talked about how the show should always go on because that's what they would want.
I'm telling you right now, if Vince McMahon would have died on a pay-per-view or on Raw, that show would still go on.
There is a phrase, the show must go on.
Absolutely.
I don't necessarily always agree with it, but there is that phrase. And, I think you're probably right. Vince, if he were to go, say, Survivor Series coming up in Indy, if he were to go, he'd probably still want the show to continue.
If you end the show early, whether it be a half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour, now you got to get 17,000 people out of a building and avoid panic. Everyone left knowing something happened and it was addressed, but to just stop it and try to push everybody out the doors isn't going to end well.
David Hero, you mentioned earlier about the cold starts, if you will, that Jerry Lawler has had or seemingly had on
nuts.
air. Why don't you explain to the audience what that means and why, as a promoter and a person who knows what it takes to prepare to get ready for a wrestling matchup, why it may not have been the best place.
Jerry the King Lawler, he will leave that announce table and hop right in the ring and do a 5 to 10 minute match. Everyone else in the back is stretching, getting ready, getting their head right. Jerry the King Lawler gets up, takes off his ring jacket, and hops in the ring. The only stretching he gets is those maybe 7 steps from the table into the ring. Doesn't give the body enough time to warm up.
This is assuming he doesn't warm up backstage before.
But even if he does, he's sitting for at least a half an hour, 40 minutes. Very seldom does he start off the show in a match. And I think something like that has to be taken into consideration going forward with their matches.
Well, so much discussion to be had, including Michael Cole's handling of the situation, which has been talked about a lot since Monday night. We're going to talk about that when we come back here on the Pro Wrestling Report, primetime Saturday night. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pro Wrestling Report, primetime Saturday night. Damian Nelson sitting here alongside David Hero and Mike Wickett of Sports Radio 1250 WSSP. We're talking about the situation this past Monday night where Jerry the King Lawler collapsed and suffered a heart attack at ringside on the live broadcast of Monday Night Raw. And one thing that's been widely discussed is Michael Cole's handling of that situation. We saw him come back 3 times and give us updates as to not only Jerry's condition, but what had happened. And really that first update was, I guess for lack of a better word, just absolutely chilling to listen to and watch.
I was talking to you, and I go, he's dead. There is no way.
There was no doubt.
There was no way when Cole was making that announcement, like, there's no way he survived because you can't have somebody in the back that long on CPR.
And you were simply waiting. And it was at that moment where the similarities to Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler telling us about Owen Hart in '99 came into my head, because with the way Cole was positioning himself, the way he was talking, with the way he was attempting to deliver the message he was delivering, you were expecting the unfortunate news that Jerry Lawler had passed. And really, quite frankly, at that time, he had.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Michael Cole, for as much as we make fun of him and we rip on him and we say he sucks or whatever else, he might have now become one of the top babyfaces on Monday Night Raw because the fans connected with him. They felt his pain, and they appreciate how he handled business better than any of us ever could have thought he would have.
You know, it's almost more than that, and this just struck me. What makes JR so great, aside from his God-given talent to call a match? He has what with the fans?
Oh, he has that emotional connection.
That happened on Monday night between the wrestling world and Michael Cole.
Absolutely. Michael Cole. Who would have thought?
Well, here's one
Are
thing.
you
a lot of
really
people-
that surprised?
No, I'm not surprised at all.
Are you
because
really that surprised?
he has done it before, but he has not had the situation has not been there where he could connect with the fans.
True.
That situation was there on Monday night. Unfortunate situation, but it was there on Monday night. Now, no secret, Michael Cole came from CBS News. He covered the first Iraq War. He's a reporter. He knows what he's doing out there. But they saw the real man in Michael Cole this past Monday night, and he was the only link that wrestling fans had to what was going on with Jerry Lawler throughout the remainder of that broadcast Monday night.
And he knew it, too. And he knew it. And he knew he had the connection. He knew he had the floor.
That's why he was quiet.
He was the middleman, and he knew it. And I think Michael Cole did what he had to do perfectly and to a T.
You know what was perfect was the reaction from Michael Cole when Cody Rhodes finally won a match on Raw.
Has that happened? Did that actually
Happened Monday night.
Did that actually
Happened Monday night. Cody
Everybody
Rhodes
was
gonna walk out with the
speechless.
Intercontinental Championship.
Nobody said a
Sunday
word.
at Night of Champions.
Nobody said a word. So
Here's the thing about that. There's a picture that was sent out via Twitter by Arda Okal of Aftermath that really, I guess, captured the moment that was happening in the arena in Montreal. Keep in mind, Montreal never got an update until just before the end of the broadcast as to what had happened. And it was Michael Cole just simply sitting at the broadcast table alone in the center, head in hands.
that is the image. You always remember where you were for certain events in history. That's the image that whenever we talk about Jerry Lawler and the incident on Monday Night Raw, that's the one in my head.
Well, a unfortunate situation on Monday night that has evolved into a situation where the outcome is a lot better than what we thought it would be initially, which is Jerry the King Lawler on his way to a recovery, what we expect to be a full recovery, and, you know, I guess a learning experience from
Well,
this
and
past
plus,
Monday
you know
night on Raw.
what? We never know.
Exactly.
You never know when that knock's going to come on your door.
Yeah. Well, Mike Wickett, thank you for joining us for this discussion here this week.
I'm really
Providing
proud.
more
You
a
two
sports
guys actually
perspective.
did pretty well together today.
Wait till next week.
David Hero, thank you as well. And we will see you next week right here on the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime Saturday night. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.